back with another video here on the endocrine system. So we're continuing on in chapter 18. Our previous video, we focused in on the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland, and now we're going to move on to the thyroid and the parathyroid glands. So two glands in this video, but anatomically, they're located pretty close to each other. So if you want to find your thyroid gland, you're basically going to find your Adam's apple, which is the layman's term for this thyroid cartilage. And then you'll see the thyroid gland is just below that. You can't really distinguish it from the surrounding tissue because glandular tissue is pretty soft. Okay, but there it is right below that thyroid cartilage. You'll look at the histology of this in lab and it's kind of unique. So the thyroid gland is made up of all of these little cavities, and these are called follicles. The follicular cells are these simple cuboidal cells that kind of surround that follicle and are going to produce the substance found inside of them. This substance is typically referred to as a colloid, meaning it's kind of a gelatinous substance. But this is where you're going to find the thyroid hormones. This is a little unique as well. Most of our organs aren't going to store like a 3-month supply of a hormone. Most of them are kind of making the hormone as needed. And here in the thyroid gland, we do see quite a bit of storage going on. Okay, so as we look at these glands, and I should say the parathyroid gland, you can't actually see in this picture on the posterior, the back side of this gland, there's actually 2 pairs of little glands, and we'll look at that when we get there. As far as hormones are concerned, in the thyroid gland, we're going to look at the thyroid hormones, and then we're also going to see that the thyroid gland makes a hormone called calcitonin, and then we'll move on to parathyroid hormone. So the thyroid hormones are going to be produced by these follicular cells that surround the follicles. There we go. And the book goes into really great detail here. I want to point out a couple key steps as far as this production is. So one of the things that you absolutely should know, right, is that the production of thyroid hormone requires iodine. And so that's really the first step they're showing you here, is the cell actually doing an active transport to bring iodine into these follicular cells. And this is the follicle, these are the follicular cells, to bring iodine in against its concentration gradient. It does this with the help of thyroid-stimulating hormone. That helps the cells uptake iodine and also tells the thyroid gland when to release some of these thyroid hormones. Okay, what we're going to see happen inside of the cell here is the cell is producing a protein called thyroglobulin. And this thyroglobulin protein then is going to pick up an iodine molecule and then be sent into the follicle for storage. So really, when we think about what that colloid is, it's a lot of this thyroglobulin, and then in the colloid, we actually make that final conversion into our thyroid hormones, which are T3 and T4. So T3, let's do this, T4 is called thyroxine. Really, T4 is super common, and it is one of the thyroid hormones. It actually gets 4 iodines placed on it. Now, this is actually the majority of thyroid hormone. It's something like 80% of the production. But oddly enough, T3 is actually a more potent version. And when T4 makes it to cells, a lot of it's actually converted subsequently into T3. T3 is triiodothyronine. But T3 is much easier to say. And these two together are the thyroid hormones. Now, both of these are lipid-soluble molecules, so you might recall from chapter 17 a couple things. They're actually going to travel bound to carrier proteins, right? That's going to help keep them in, allow them to be soluble and be carried by the bloodstream And if you recall, that typically gives a hormone a longer half-life because it can avoid degradation. And then we'll also see that as a lipid-soluble hormone, which kind of receptor we're going to use? You're right. This is actually going to go to the nucleus. So this uses nuclear receptors, and we can look at that as well. Okay, so the big thing to keep in mind here is as we talk about these thyroid hormones, is what they actually do. So one of the big things is that they have what they call the calorogenic effect. Basically, these hormones tell our body to use more calories. And it's not really about calories or some diet we're on. What we're looking at here is these hormones tell us to increase ATP production in cells, right? And they're actually going to tell us to increase the number of sodium-potassium pumps. Remember those from AMP1? And so those sodium-potassium pumps, if you recall, that actually uses a ton of ATP. And so kind of the side effect here is that increased energy use, right? And so we're burning calories. And that's important to know. That would help you think about whether someone maybe is in a hypothyroid with low levels of thyroid hormone or putting on weight, and vice versa. Okay. So regardless, these are huge hormones as far as kind of metabolism, energy usage goes. The other thing I'll say about thyroid hormone, and I'll move on, is that it also has what's called a permissive effect on growth hormone. So thyroid hormones affect lots of cells in the body, as does growth hormone, and you actually need thyroid hormones for the growth hormones to be able to have their effect in lots of cells. Okay. Now, so that's what's going on. The thyroid hormones are being stored in these follicles, produced again by these follicular cells. The other hormone that the thyroid gland produces is called calcitonin, and it's produced by these C cells or parafollicular cells. So, like alongside of the follicle, parafollicular cells. Calcitonin is going to be a hormone that's important in blood calcium regulation. It actually helps decrease blood calcium levels. So calcitonin is going to work on three main targets. It is going to act on bones, right? It's going to actually inhibit osteoclasts. If you remember, osteoclasts were those little scrubbing bubbles. They're actually releasing calcium from the skeleton into the blood. We're trying to lower blood calcium, so we're going to inhibit those osteoclasts. It also inhibits the absorption of calcium at the small intestine, and then also tells the kidney to go ahead and excrete calcium, pee it out. So 3 different ways that calcitonin can help draw those blood calcium levels down. Now, it doesn't even need the hypothalamus to tell it to do this. This is in a direct response to blood calcium levels. Now, interestingly enough, our second endocrine organ we got to talk about here, there's a better picture of those parathyroid glands. There's 4 of them on the posterior side of the thyroid. It's going to produce a hormone called parathyroid hormone. Right? That one should be easy to remember. And parathyroid hormone is actually acting to increase blood calcium levels. So in the parathyroid gland, we have, and these are a nice picture, so you can actually see the thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland. It's actually a group of cells called chief cells that produce parathyroid hormone. And this parathyroid hormone is increasing blood calcium levels. And it does it basically in the opposite on the same 3 organs, right? So as far as the bone goes, you basically start decreasing osteoblast activity, and that's going to free up, right? You can't put the calcium into the bone, and so that frees it up to stay in the blood. We're also going to increase reabsorption of calcium by the kidney, so we're saying don't pee it out. And then at the small intestine, parathyroid hormone is actually going to help increase levels of vitamin D, and vitamin D is necessary in order for the absorption of calcium. So it increases the absorption of calcium as well. And so this image is just trying to give you an idea of how both calcitonin from the thyroid gland and parathyroid hormone from the parathyroid gland are working oppositely in order to maintain homeostasis. And so as calcium levels rise, we would see this release of calcitonin drop those levels back down. If calcium levels start to fall, we would see the opposite in parathyroid hormones release. And so the thing to keep in mind with a lot of these hormones is we're constantly making these minute changes, right? It's not this major event. We're trying to, for this kind of homeostasis, we're keeping things in a pretty narrow window. Okay, and this is the same idea. This is the image from your textbook, just talking about if calcium levels increase, the calcitonin brings it back down, and vice versa. So either way, if you're more of a picture person, this helps. Okay, that's it for the thyroid and the parathyroid.